keep saying.
There's a pain. It makes it difficult, that's
I
why.
can imagine. I don't know how they get away.
Yeah.
The decision
It's the
maker.
age of miniaturization. I mean, there's nothing in those lots.
Should we get started? It's 5:30.
Is this the,
If you look with the new sidewalks, like if you go down Seekonk Central Ave down there, you'll notice that whole up in there.
meeting to order at 5:31?
Can't play the.
Just wait for those finished agendas to get handed out. First order of business is to vote to approve the January 23rd meeting minutes.
Move to
23rd.
approve?
Second.
Any objections? Motion's adopted. Next order of business is the vote to confirm payment for the following invoices. I am going to skip the invoice number just because of the length of those, but FedEx invoice date 2/4/2019, postage to MSBA, $19.57. Chairman approved the date 2/14. Sun Chronicle on January 31st, procurement advertising for $193.20 on 2/25. And then we have Skanska on February 7th for the OPM design development for $66,040 on February 15th. And we have Castle Booze on January 31st, A&E design and services for $566,317 on February 15th. And we have Consigli, and the date was January 31st, pre-construction services for $20,361 on February 15th. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any objections? No?
No objections. This is just to confirm, these had to have already gotten approval because of the timeliness of when we last met.
Yeah, previously at one of our meetings, we voted to allow the chairman,
Right.
me and I think Jack in backup cases, to sign off on stuff when, that way we
Yes.
can just keep things moving along. So that way we've sort of pre-approved signatures for these things, yeah.
Right, yeah, because I just noticed we have a few motions, but these look like the prepaid items for that, like they fall under that provision.
Yeah, and they are for things that the chairman considers to be not controversial. They're the regular monthly bills that we
Absolutely, yeah.
incur. And this way, we don't incur interest for late payments.
Right, exactly. So-
No
And they
objection.
don't exceed the original PO, so it's not a change order.
Very good, so that's adopted. Now, the next order of business is the Attleboro High School for the vote to approve payment for Skanska is an amount of $85,175 for services rendered through February 10th, 2019. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any objections? Motion adopted. Next vote is to approve payment for Castle Booze in the amount of $539,311 for professional services rendered through February 28th. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any objections? No? Measure is adopted. And a vote to approve payment to Consigli, invoice number 6, dated February 28th, the amount of $20,361 for pre-construction services.
So moved. Second?
Any objections? No? So good. Measure is adopted. And so we can go into our presentations now. So the Attleboro High School project update. First order of business is the Brennan Field. I thought we were done with. I think everybody thought we were done with, but keeps coming back at us.
We had a meeting with
Yeah.
you at the City Hall. After our last meeting, and I had some discussions, and we felt that there was some benefit and more prudent action to attack the Brennan Fields as an alternate, because the site work was already over the 8%, so there really was no outlay of cost for the district as a risk. But also it allowed us to include it in the bid documents so that in the event that we get to the last phase of the bid package number 4, the last phase of the project, and there's extra money from the buyout from Consigli, that could be applied directly to a number that we already have from a bidder. Bid package number 3, which is going out May 3rd, would include the Brennan Field package. That would allow us to get a real number from that and know what we could enact should the money become available at the end of the project bid period to use that towards the field. The shame would be that we would get to the end of the project, the GMP would be settled by Consigli, and we would not have a package ready or a cost ready to enact the Brennan Field, and it would have to be outside of the grant or outside of the bond. And we thought that it was more prudent to do it within this action of this committee if it's available to be done. That is, you wouldn't lose the money because you would have it available to spend on the field, but you would lose the money if you didn't. So we had a meeting, we discussed the options and the benefits. It appeared as though that the preference was to go with a synthetic field rather than a grass field, since the grass field would have twice as much use as normal because of it be used during the construction period by all the teams, and it would not wear well. And so the feeling was that for the, I wouldn't say minimal cost, but the upcharge for it, that the synthetic field was a better bet to last during the construction period and beyond than the grass field would be, and that was what we should price, and that's what we should go ahead and try and design. So if you remember, at one point, we had already begun doing the survey work from a meeting, I think December 12th, and at that meeting, we presented a cost to do the work for design. In a subsequent meeting, we were told to cease, but to bill for work we had done through the survey and wetlands flagging process. We've continued to complete the survey and wetlands flagging process, and that is, I presented as one cost package, one proposal. And then to do the rest of the design as a synthetic field, we've basically taken that original number and just culled out the cost for the survey and wetlands flagging, and the balance is for architectural design for the field itself. So in order to move us forward to complete this work by the May 3rd bid date for bid package number 3, which is the major site package, hoping we'll get some benefits of scale from the bidding from the site bidders, we would have to have action on this pretty quickly so that we know we can go forward.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Just a couple of points. One is that when we voted last time, I was under the mistaken impression, and I think others in the room may have been as well, that the so-called Band-Aid approach was actually going to solve some of the drainage problems. As it turns out, the Band-Aid was only moving home plate. And in discussions with the superintendent and the principal, especially the superintendent, he said, look, the field's unplayable. It rains and it's unplayable for 3 days. And we're going to be forced then to look at finding money to go down and make Coelho an appropriate place to play. And so at a meeting that a number of us attended, we kicked this around and came to the conclusion and recommendation to this group that we look at going with the artificial turf proposal for a couple of reasons. One was that, as we know, if we don't spend it, we lose it with the MSBA. But second of all, that would be the solution that would actually make those fields very useful. I believe the athletic director wanted to have the baseball field at one end, a softball field at the other, and then 2 overlaid soccer fields in the middle.
In the outfields, yeah.
And so we would, if the bids come in low enough and we can do this as an ad alternate, we will have made the field situation at the high school, I think, better than it is now. And we will end up with fields that can be used extensively because, as I understand it, and Bill, you can probably confirm this better than I can, those fields are constantly in use. And we have JV, we have varsity, we have freshmen, we have people there all the time, correct?
And,
School.
and our recreational partners, as well as, Brennan using it for their educational purposes. And I would say there's an intense demand for it, but as you already accurately stated, the fact that, anywhere from 50 to 60% of the time it's underwater, we don't get the use out of it at all.
So if we can save 1% on the construction bid, which is around $223 million, we're hoping there's enough money to put it into this very useful end of the project. And so therefore, the group decided that we would ask this group if you would endorse having KBA do that. And of course, if you remember from last time, this money's already in their contract. So all we have to do is authorize them to do it in order to get a number in May. And we won't know in May whether we can accept that or not, I think, until we get to September and get the rest of the bidding. But at least we would know what the order of magnitude is.
Talking about February.
Yes, I just wanted to correct that we would have the bid documents for the rest of the project September 30th, and then we anticipate going through a bid period, pre-qualifications, qualifying the bids to make sure that the scope is there, and then when we would get to a point of establishing a guaranteed maximum price, the GMP, that we would know whether there were the funds available or not. So by doing it at that stage rather than as part of bid package one, we've really mitigated the risk to the owner to say, we're not gonna do this unless we know we have the money. So the timing works, and that work would take place in the spring of 2020. And so then they would have access to utilize the fields in the fall of 2020.
The minimal risk is getting the site bidder to hold his number for that extra, 6 or 8 months until we know we have the money.
Which I think they would, because the overall site package is a very large package. There's a lot of interest in this project, and so the fields, you'll never get as competitive pricing without, bundling it with something this big otherwise. In fact, you would probably have a group of contractors that might not look at it at all, and, if it was decoupled from this project.
So I have a question, probably have a couple here. When we last met, as a committee, and, the way the options were presented, we opted to go with what we're calling the Band-Aid approach, which was probably around $500,000, I think, of the cost to redo the field.
I
No.
don't
No.
even think it was 200,000.
Was it?
It was
The
very.
Band-Aid approach was simply to shift the baseball field over so that right field wasn't constrained by the new fencing for the easement. But the level of the field, the drainage in the field was not going to be corrected. The grass option that was presented by Consigli for, I think, 2.7 million, was doing that. It moved the baseball field to the west end of the site. It raised the field grade, and it provided a new underdrain system throughout the field with an irrigation system. That would have corrected the drainage problems, but the Band-Aid approach doesn't correct it. All it does is shift the baseball field to allow it to be. Right, I was just trying to remember, because you mentioned 1%, which would be about $2.2 million, but the options that we had laid out were a little bit more than that, right?
It
So
might be
there
as
was-
much as 3.2, I agree.
Right,
But I'm
there's-
just saying is that maybe it's 1.5% that we need. But it's not undoable, and I think Steve Johnson from Consigli, who was at that meeting, suggested that he was hopeful that our bids would come in that way.
No, I understand, and I'm not disagreeing. I was just trying to figure out how much of the project funding we had invested in what option we had currently put on the table. That was all.
Also
Very,
to-
very little.
Yeah, also to note that the way, correct me if I'm misspeaking here, the way it was priced was if it was separate from this project.
Correct, it was
There were two, you had two price options on there. There was the price if it could be done within the project, which you're already, we've already got you under contract, and then there was the other price if we had to do it as a standalone, which we would have to find the funding and then also pay for the project management of it. So I guess its own separate project. I do remember that. I was just trying to remember the numbers in place when we originally decided to go with the lowest option. But I thought even then, at that meeting, we had talked about the idea of doing this as a potential add-all, as we were talking about, in the event that we found savings.
Steve, I think your numbers were 2.2 and 2.7, depending on in the bid or out, and then 3.2 and 3.7, as opposed to in the bid and out.
Yeah, that was,
correct.
I recall it being about those numbers as well. But the 3.2 is what we're looking at, right? That would be the in the bid.
Potentially.
Potentially be
It's
the
an
s-
ad alternate, so we
Yeah.
don't know yet.
Well,
I
it
understand
has
that
to, it
too.
has to be designed and it has to be bid, but that's our estimate.
It's a budget.
Correct,
Right.
correct.
May I ask a question? I'm all for it. I'm so glad we took a step away from it at that last meeting and relooked at it and took a deep breath, because I think the mayor and Jack and myself were like, well, this is way beyond the scope of what we had originally thought we were doing, and to step away from it was very smart, and to come back to it and approach it, I'm glad that we're doing that. So I'm in full support of that part of it. The question I have is, we keep referring to the field as the Brennan Field. Is that field part of the high school footprint, or does it belong to Brennan Middle School?
I think I can answer that.
Yeah,
So, I think, first of all, the answer is that Brennan, Studley, and the high school are all on one legal lot at this point.
Okay,
And one of the things we need to do at some point is divide them off.
right.
The second thing is, as I understand it, those fields, Brennan Middle School does use them for some phys ed programs, but that the majority of the use is high school use.
Well, I'm not questioning the use, and just, the only reason I bring it up is because we're trying to sell the old Brennan, the old high school.
Yeah.
So everything has an address and has a plat, right? So.
And I've looked at the
when I look
assessor's
at-
maps.
Yeah, so I'm hoping
And-
someone had the answer.
And the answer is that the assessor's maps show it as the
The-
school department.
The campus, the whole
The campus,
campus is, oh,
yes.
okay. So we have no issues with the bonds or anything like, because we're bonded for the high school project.
The auditor has raised the question,
Mhm.
and we've given her some information, and I
Okay.
have not heard back from her.
Terrific.
Would
Good.
you suggest it'd be beneficial if we called it something else?
Oh, no, I just,
Well, if we called it the fields closer to Brennan, maybe that's a better way of referring to it.
I know it's
We want to shorten the
semantics.
name, Jack. We don't want to make a.
But maybe we should call it the secondary high school fields, I mean, some other name.
I know it's semantics and everyone refers to different parts of the city, different names, whether it's right or wrong. Well, it may be semantics. I just thought I would ask that, does it belong to the high school of Brennan? And what you're saying is it's all one campus, so we're.
You know, we were referring to the Brennan Fields only to
That's how
differentiate it from the high
that's how
school field.
everyone talks.
But they are high
refers to
school
them.
fields, and I think that's the overriding point.
But if-
They are high school fields
if-
that are
if you feel it might
extensively
be
used by high
confusing,
school teams.
Confusing to the public, confusing the MSBA to have it referred to as the Brennan Field, so it doesn't look like we're actually renovating Brennan Middle School fields as
Right.
part of the high school project. We can rename it something else.
The auditor said to me, and she was right, she said, well, look, if you wanted to use the money at Ponce and Hewitt, I think that's outside the scope of the bond. And I agree with her. But to me, these are fields that the high school uses every day. And so perhaps we should come up with a different name.
You know, we can call it Western Fields or something like that.
Right.
If there's a member of the community that wants to pay for the entire fields, I'm sure we could think of some names for it.
Sell the naming rights.
Well, and also one other consideration is that, you know, one question begs the next, that when we originally thought we had the location identified for the underground utility, or let me say, the utility easement, National Grid wanted to run it right through the parking lot, have these high transmission lines and guidelines coming down right through the parking lot and up next to the
I
school.
remember that.
And we said, well, why can't you put it across the street? And if you put it across the street, you know, you don't want to have a child running and trying to catch a ball and catches their neck instead on one of the guidelines. I said, why can't we put it underground? It's a cost to the client, so to speak, otherwise. And so by moving the easement then and having to put a fence in there, then all of a sudden it shortened the field. So kind of like snowball, the impact of making one decision and moving it over.
Right. But Mary Ann, if you think about it, if you look at the assessor's map, the new road
Yes.
and the electric easement are both on that lot.
Correct. That's my point.
Right.
That's my point.
Maybe I just was unsophisticated, not understanding that that's what you
Oh,
were
I'm
saying.
sorry. Oh, maybe I should have just said it that way.
So, I think that a new vote is probably in order to do the odd alternate, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's have a motion to, first, let's rescind our previous vote and then we'll do a new vote. Motion to rescind the previous vote.
So moved.
A second, any objections?
Second, and objection.
Very good, so the previous vote to table the discussion is rescinded. Now let's have a vote to create what will come up with.
Western Fields.
The Western Fields, new name, as an odd alternate, and in the event that we are able to save about 1% off the overall cost, we dedicate that money towards these fields. We have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any objections? No, very good. Measure is adopted. Very good. Moving on. Next order of business is the qualification results for BP number 2, trade bidders, electrical, plumbing, HVAC.
Okay. So we, Skanska, have, we put out a request for qualifications for the enabling package, which is the plumbing, mechanical, and electrical. And the same criteria was required that we had done before for the early electrical package. So we received the information, we confirmed that they had met all of the criteria, checked all the references. We conferred with the CM, the design team, their sub-consultants, about their experiences with the companies that had submitted their qualifications. And on the list here, we had a list of 9 electrical trade bidders that were pre-qualified, 6 HVAC trade bidders that pre-qualified, and 4 plumbing trade bidders that have pre-qualified. And I just put on the back, this was just the criteria for qualification. So we would ask that the SBC would approve the qualifications, and we would like to notify them of their eligibility to bid tomorrow in writing.
Can we ask a question? What is the work of bid package number 2? I mean, I know, well, I remember 1, but what work is in number 2?
It's the interim parking package. So where we're removing, as part of this package, pavement on the western parking lot beside the high school, we're replacing it by expanding parking lots in the front, the east side near the Sweet Forest, and in the back near the CTE wing, to create enough spaces to compensate for what we're losing in the front.
That's what the zoning board is calling interim parking.
Interim parking, yes. We're also including parking across the street for Highland Country Club for the contractors, for 353 or so spaces. And then we're also including what we're terming as enabling, which is simply to reroute some existing utilities. We have a gas line, electrical line, and possibly a sewer line that we have to relocate as part of the work, where they're gonna fall under the footprint of the existing building. Craig refused to change the building design to accommodate these, so we have to, it's all Craig's fault.
Sorry.
So we have
So
to,
is the plumber moving the gas line?
the plumber's moving the gas line. We have a cooling tower that exists that'll be under the footprint that has to be relocated. The HVAC contract is doing that and providing a new flue for the boilers in the existing boiler room. Kind of fortuitous where the existing boiler chimney was failing anyway, and would have to have been replaced sometime in the next year or so. And so we're pulling that in the building, and we have to get rid of the chimney because the foundation under that chimney would fall within close proximity to the edge of the footprint of the existing building where the excavation would take place. And then electrical, the electrical lines run way under the parking lot that exists with a couple of manholes and swings around all the way to the CT wing. So we're gonna take that at a manhole near the front of the building, run it up the side of the building and across the roof and into the boiler room and into the electrical room in the CT wing.
And so, obviously, did every electrician who is bidding or was pre-qualified for package 1 then bid on package 2, or is asking to bid on package 2?
That is correct, and I've
Plus-
identified
plus
them.
2 others?
Plus 2 others. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we had Bright Light on a project, didn't we, Gail?
Name does not sound familiar to me. No.
They were on one of our projects.
Very common Fouts bidder.
Mm-hmm.
Bid a lot of Fouts bid projects, Bright Light.
Okay.
Maybe for the DPW garage?
That's who it was. It was the DPW garage. They were
I
the,
remember the name.
yeah, they were the electrical. Okay. NB Kenny is a familiar name as well. I want a motion to approve all of these?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Any objections? No? Very good.
Thank you.
So, let's have an update on the MSBA 60% CD package for submission on March 28th.
That's something.
I can talk about it if you want. Okay.
John, a lot, you can talk.
You've been drawing a lot, I know you have. Okay. So we're, right now, we're in the process, we're gonna be meeting on Friday with Consigli, where we've conducted 2 peer estimates. We have an estimate from Consigli coming in, and then an independent cost estimate coming in from PM&C under KBA's contract. What we will do is review those estimates, reconcile them, and reconcile to within budget. If we find that we are not in budget, then we will go through a value management exercise, because we are not allowed to submit to the MSBA without having budgets reconciled, and any recommendations for value management needs to be included and incorporated into the drawings with that submission. So, you know, we're in the process. Skanska as well as Consigli have been conducting constructability reviews. This is pretty standard that we try to find any gray areas or gaps in the drawings, because the drawings are not done. So we expect that we're gonna find things, as well as reviewing the specifications. We also have ongoing structural peer review for the 90% structural drawings. That's something that's required by the MSBA. So that will be included with this submission, as well as we have, independent of us, we have the commissioning agent who also conducts a review of the drawings, and then those comments get addressed in the drawings by KBA. So we have a lot of activity going on right now, with the bid packages. We're working towards really hopefully starting construction the first week in April. Certainly, as, and I'm sort of wandering into another category, so I'm gonna stop it right there.
Yeah,
And then we
if I could build on that a little bit.
Yeah.
So as Marion said, at this point, at 60%, a lot of people are reviewing our documents, which we think is a benefit not only to you, but also to us. Fresh set of eyes to make sure that, as she mentioned, there's no gaps. And the reviews are for constructability from Skanska and Consigli, but we also have our internal consultants doing, for all intents and purposes, third-party reviews, an acoustic consultant, an energy modeler, and all those, digitally verifying everything we've done with our building is appropriate and providing us recommendations to make it better. So those things that are happening concurrently behind the scenes right now. And then just one more thing from an MSBA standpoint is a couple weeks ago, we hosted the MSBA at the Castle Blues offices for a presentation that they had requested as far as an update of design. In our opinion, it was a positive meeting, had positive feedback from the MSBA, and we're moving forward.
You wanna mention, just to read, Desi,
Well, we're waiting to hear back. I've sent another email today, actually, that we're waiting for confirmation about the next Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESI meeting. Have not heard back from them. The last email I sent, probably about a week or 2 ago, they told me they were putting that on hold.
Okay.
That it wasn't time sensitive for them, but I'm now asking again, to, in the near
And what
future.
are
we
they-
should do.
What
The
do we
purpose
need
of the
them
meeting.
to do?
Yes, the purpose of the meeting is based on the fact that you have Chapter 74 education for career and technical training that the Department of Education will want to look at the drawings and understand that we have the appropriate safety protocols in place. So one might say, well, shouldn't the design team know that? Well, they do. The design team is following the building code, they're following the OSHA standards, and they're doing their work. But then there's also the Department of Education that has a 10-second rule where if a student is working on a piece of equipment, that within 10 seconds you could go anywhere and have an emergency shut off. For example, if someone got their hand caught in equipment or something like that. And so, because they don't have published or written guidelines, I mean, we're using best practices and standard practices for what we should do there, but the MSBA has found on other projects in the past that the Department of Education comes in at the last minute and says, you know, we'd like to have this here and that there, and what we're trying to do is have it be incorporated in those comments captured in part of the bid document so that we're not adding scope at the end of the job and impacting getting a certificate of occupancy because the Department of Education won't sign off.
And I think it's just built onto the, being a partner with MSBA and the whole process, with, especially with the ESE, that there's so many parties that look at what we're doing to make sure that every decision is thought through and we're making the right decision. So it's their chance to talk with us, review what we're proposing, and make sure there's no gaps and they're in agreement as their own review, just like we did with the MSBA a few weeks ago.
If I can add to that, the MSBA sent about a half a dozen people down, and looking at their faces around the room as Craig made the presentation, I think they were very impressed with how far we've come. We also had a meeting this past Monday with the police chief, the fire chief, and the building inspector to update them on life safety and public safety, if that's the right word, issues. We can't talk about any of that really in public, but I think it was a very positive meeting, and they were pleased with the information that we presented. Number of suggestions back and forth, things as small as, you know, should this fire hydrant be here or here, and some other much more significant things that were discussed. And I think safe to say that the chiefs and the building inspector were all very much on board with what we're doing. Then I think on Tuesday, Bill, was there a meeting that you went to?
Yes, with the health department, just about not only the Whitson's kitchen, but the Blue Pride Bistro kitchen, just talking about various and sundry things, and he seemed to be impressed as
Yeah,
well.
we wanted most, but a lot of health departments, because they have to review and certify and inspect the kitchens before they can be occupied. A lot of them wait till the very end of the project, and then, as Marion said, you don't want to get people come in at the last minute making changes, so we like to reach out to them early in the process. Frank Wojciechowski is the inspector from the health department who came to the office, very personable guy, and looked at our drawings and gave us a lot of good suggestions. Was impressed with our consultant's work, how thorough she was, and didn't really have any issues that we have to deal with, just continue on the path that we're on, and we should be good to go when we go to submit for the permit, 3 years from now.
Then if I can add, for the city boards, we received the Horsley-Witten report on the stormwater issues, and Samiotis filed their response on Monday to that. There is a meeting tomorrow at 1 o'clock at City Hall with the conservation agent, Horsley-Witten, and our consultants to go over that response and determine if we have dealt with all of the issues that they raised. I do know that there were some additional test pits required, and Joe, are those happening, or have they happened, or?
They have not happened yet. They were scheduled to happen the end of this week, or depending on the snow, and if the snow melts, they'll happen the end of this week, or they'll happen beginning of next.
Okay.
We'd been working with Walsh to go out and do the test pits.
And then we are on before the zoning board tomorrow night, but we've already completed our testimony there, so I'm just going to go in and ask them to continue to their next meeting. April 11th, I think, is the date, and hopefully that night we'll get a vote on the things that we need from them. That would be contingent on finishing with the Conservation Commission, and then we're on, I believe it's the 25th, with the Planning Board to finish our testimony there. So I think the permitting is moving along, and it seems to be going well, and I would expect that by the middle of April, we should have all the hearings closed and have our permits for, from the city. Those permits are not necessary for the work that we need, that we're going to start in early April. They're necessary for the building, so it's things like signage and parking space size and the 4 stories and a bunch of other issues that approving the interim parking, the earth removal that will take place when the foundation work starts, and the major site plan review and approving the stormwater controls. So I think that's all moving along at a slow but steady pace.
The work in April has been previously approved.
Yes, the work in April was already, we already have our stormwater
Yes.
permit for that, and that was when the city council approved the new roadway.
Thank you. For the next update, we're looking at Skanska recommending an award for the materials testing contract for the project. And
So I have a package of information, and we had sent out an RFP, a request for proposals from material testing firms, and we actually received 8, which we didn't expect to get that many firms interested. So just as kind of an overview, the materials testing is required, it's code required QA/QC monitoring and inspection service during construction that ensures that the components of the structure are being built, perform, and are in compliance with the design documents and building codes. It's a service performed by an independent third-party firm. The services are procured by the owner. There's money carried in the project budget, and these services are reimbursable expenses by the MSBA. Some of the testing performed are soil compaction, compressive strength of the concrete, weld inspections, masonry inspections. So what we did, Mary Ann and I, and we had somebody else at the office helping us. We had the 8 proposals, and all of the firms that submitted were qualified. All of them were qualified to do the work. They all had to submit resumes for their inspectors and whatnot. But we had to find a way to narrow down the field. So we had I think it's the 3rd page, it'll be a spreadsheet, and that was there was a list of exhibits that were required for them to submit to us. And then what we did is on the last couple of pages there, this is, it's a fee schedule. What we did is we asked them to complete that, and in red, kind of a reddish color, mauve, those are some of the most requested services. So we use that as, it would be the total value of like a quantity of 1. So like for 1 hour or 1 each. And then we sort of use that as, to do a comparison as far as the value goes. So immediately, there were some proposals that, once we looked through all of their qualification data, we looked at their prices, there were some that, we automatically thought not advantageous to the project. 5 of them, in fact, and they were eliminated because of cost, exclusions, they were subbing out work, we had concerns about manpower, and their ability to carry a project of this size. It's a big project. And then the 3 remaining proposals were then evaluated by the fee, the distance to the job site, and the location of their testing laboratory. So what I had done is there's another page, and the 5 firms that were taken out of consideration. I just wrote down, the big reasons. Allied Testing, great firm. They're out of Springfield. They had the highest basic service fee, and they're also the farthest distance from the job site. They do charge mileage. They also charge an hourly rate for the individual that's driving to and from the site. And a lot of the firms also have a, if they're taking a sample, there's a charge to transport the sample as well. So we had to rule them out because of that. Fenna had their proposal had the second lowest fee structure, but in their terms and conditions, I noticed there was a note that said we have a right to change our prices without any notification. So we just said, okay. They also have 3 really large contracts running concurrent with our project. Their lab is in Everett, and I don't know if you've tried to get north of Boston from here. It's not fun. So we thought that not advantageous to the project. PSI, in their proposal, they said that their rates did not include prevailing wage rates. So we thought that was, a factor that we needed to consider strongly. They are a nationwide operation. They only have 10 people in their local office, and they also have the Durfee High School project going on concurrently with ours. So that we thought was, again, not advantageous. I think it's Lero. It's a nationwide company. They were utilizing manpower from another firm, so they were subbing out the work. So we just thought that was not advantageous either. SW Cole, they didn't include pricing for all of the testing services that we had asked them to do, and they actually were the highest price for the services that are most utilized. So when we got down to the 3 final firms for consideration, Briggs, they have the closest laboratory to the job site. There's no additional charges for mileage. They included additional steel and bolting inspection rates, and they've had similar project experience, size and scope. And they had the lowest basic fee structure services of the final 3. So then we moved on to JTC. They're in Worcester. There's mileage involved with sample, transportation. They were 37% higher in their basic fee structure than Briggs was. UTS, they're in Stoneham, 46 miles from the job site. They include costs for 2-hour round-trip fees minimum, sample transportation costs. They also didn't really list what their current workload was. So that I just thought was interesting, but their fee proposal was, for the most required services, was 46% higher than Briggs. So it was our, based on all the information, their qualifications and consideration, we feel that Briggs, with their office in Rockland and their testing lab in Cumberland, Rhode Island, is the material testing service recommended to the SPC for their consideration and approval.
Any discussion
And that
on
was a lot, so if there's any questions.
Seems like an easy choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does seem like an easy choice. Any discussion though, or is it just make a motion to accept the recommendation to go with Briggs as the materials
Second.
tester? Objections? No? Very good. It's adopted. So the last order of business that we have scheduled for tonight before we open it up for other discussion is consigli the presentation of the owner's authorization letters and for the award of, bid package number 1 contracts. So, Chief?
Steve, can I ask you, is the Walsh Company going to be part of this presentation?
What do you mean?
Looks like he's.
I have a conflict of interest if you're discussing or proposing them. So if you are proposing the Walsh Company, then I need to recuse myself.
We will
If
be,
you're-
yes. We are recommending it.
Okay, so then for the record, I'm recusing myself because they're a client of my law firm.
Wasn't sure where you were going, Jeff, sorry.
Let's see.
I'm Steve Johnson. I think I've met all of you. Christy Lyons is our pre-construction manager on the project. You'll be
Everyone.
seeing more of her as well. Just wanted to start with just a refresher on the scope that we're talking about. It's just bid package 1 right now. And bid package 1 consists of creating the new rotary at the end of the row,
Don't mind me.
all the new utilities required all the way to the Sweet Forest within Rathman Willard, and then creating the new connection here, the utilities that go in the new connection, Then it's the new duct bank for National Grid, and then National Grid will take down the existing overhead lines. There's the sewer pump station that's located roughly right in this area, and the associated electrical. And then it also includes our trailers and temp fencing. Temp fencing is, we'll get into greater detail, but that's the only wrinkle. Temp fencing we bought for the entire project with this package. Everything else is just bid package one that you see here. Most of the work is contained in the Brown area, with the exception of the Rotary and then Rathbun Willard. So that's big picture scope for bid package one.
Steve, while you're at it, could you
Yes.
point out bid package number 2? Because we had a verbal, but can you point that out?
Yes. Bid package 2 is roughly the work that's gonna kind of go from here over. So this parking lot, we rip that up, and then we create the new interim parking down here in the southern end of the existing school. So we basically expand this parking lot in a couple of spaces, and over here a little bit on Sweet Forest, we expand the parking lot. Eventually, this parking lot is rebuilt, and then there's some existing utility relocations, some of which are within the footprint. And then, again, we talked about running the electrical on the roof, the existing stack, and the existing HVAC work that'll take place outside the building. That's roughly bid package 2.
Thank you.
So then, yeah, if we actually dive into the numbers, again, a big picture first, and then I'll dive into more detail. What you're looking at here is the overall summary of the cost of bid package 1. So here's the scope of work, here's the value, here's our estimate for the work, and I'll go right to the good news. The overall number is about $168,000 under what was estimated, so that's good news. So all this is trending under budget. So line by line, construction fencing, the process for construction fencing was, we went out to bid, there were we received 4 bids, 4 qualified bids for this work, and our purchasing department, well, let me back up a step, our superintendents got together and put together a phasing plan. There's actually going to be 7 different phases of temp fencing alone. Initially, we start with the bid package 1 area, then we get into the overall site, and then we'll have to move the fences as we start to demo the existing school. Then we'll move the fences again when we create the new fields over here. We've included a temporary gate that'll have to be installed to get into the parking at Highland. And overall, all in, there's about 7 different moves of the fence over the course of the project, and we thought it was advantageous to buy that in now with this scope of work. So our superintendent helped develop the phasing of that, and then our purchasing department and the rest of the team spent a lot of time on the phone going through this scope. As part of the letter that you'll receive, on the back of it is what we call a leveling sheet, which basically shows the different bidders, and then it's the scope for each phase, each scope of work, each trade, and then if each bidder carried it or not. And just for temp fencing alone, I think we have like 6 pages of scope, based on all the phasing. So what we've included in the number also is some scope of work that we know is going to happen, but we can't quantify. What I mean by that is, 5-year project, we're gonna have some fence get damaged, so we've hired a little money for that right now. We can't quantify how much damage, but we know it's going to happen. So there's a little bit of extra money in there for the unforeseens like that. And we also carried a little bit extra for just interim minor shifts in fencing or requests from the school if there's something specific that we need moved or temporary. We know that'll happen as well, so we try to capture that in this overall number as well. So the request to bring the subcontractor on board, the amount that we're asking to award them is lower than this money, this number right here, and that money is set aside for if we need it later on in the project. If we don't need it, the money goes back into the project and, we're good with fencing. So this number reflects our recommended bidder plus the additional money that I talked about for contingencies for unforeseens. The electrical scope of work, which is essentially the duct bank work and the power for the pump station, and then temporary power to our trailers. That is a trade contractor, so that was a public bid. And if we remember, there were 7 pre-qualified electrical bidders, and this represents the low qualified electrical bidder. We confirmed they're good with their number, the scope, and the schedule. We had a phone conversation with them, followed up with Skanska and KBA on that, so we're comfortable with that number there. The last number, the third number, is the site work number. We actually got 7 bids for the site work, so again, this is a project that we're gonna have a lot of coverage on. It's very attractive to a lot of different firms, so. With this scope, same thing, our superintendents, our team got together with Skanska, KBA, helped develop the scope. And then we actually brought the low 2 bidders in, and we had what we call D-scope meetings with KBA, Skanska, and the engineer on the phone. And we literally walked through almost every line of scope. Once again, it's like 8 pages of scope, to make sure that they had everything from traffic barrels to the correct signage, to the actual scope, the sewer lines, you name it, we made sure it was in there. It's a very thorough process. Our purchasing department spent hours on the phone before and after, making sure that the scope was correct and everybody was comfortable with it. So we brought the 2 low in, we gave them a chance to go back, take a look at their numbers. They provided their final numbers to us, and this number represents the low qualified bidder for that. So those are the 3 owner approval letters that we're gonna be presenting tonight, that will, the actual hard copies for these trades. The rest of the scope within bid package 1, with the rest of the numbers, are made up of subcontractor default insurance. Again, is the insurance that we carry on the site work and the construction fence companies only. The electrical trade contractor, they carry their own. Then we've carried a little bit for construction contingency, again, for other unforeseens. Who knows what happens when you start digging into the ground. General conditions are, it's the consigli management, it's our project management team, our superintendent, it's our staff. General requirements includes the trailer rentals, setting them up, dumpsters, items like that we'll need for the first few months. And then builder's risk insurance. This is consigli's general liability insurance, consigli's bond, and we have a lot of fun, but we actually do like to get paid as well, so there's a little bit of fee for consigli in here as well. So that makes up the 4.1 overall value for the GMP, just this first phase. So if approved, this becomes an amendment to our pre-construction contract right now. But tonight, it's just approval of the 3 contractors, 3 scopes of work there, and then eventually, we'll be doing this 4 times total, right? There'll be four phases, 4 amendments to our contract. So bid package 2, bid package 3, and then the rest of the project will make up our entire GMP between now and March of next year. Questions?
Yeah, Steve, I had one because I'm looking at a couple of line items for design estimate, contingency, and escalation.
Yep.
That are part of the estimate, but what's coming on the amendment is there's no dollars there. And
Correct.
obviously, we haven't started anything, but is
Yep.
there, because like we're coming in under, but yet like the site work looks like it's a bit over.
Yep.
I mean, is there the possibility though that we, like, I'm just trying to understand crunch the numbers and,
Yep.
and get the math in, because we're not accounting for anything right now, because there's nothing to
Take
account
this.
for, but at some point there may be,
Yeah.
right? Is there an expectation that
Yeah.
there could be escalation or contingency, and that
No.
that number could go over, or is,
So contingency, yeah, so we'll start with design and estimate contingency.
okay,
The reason we don't have anything here is because we feel the design is done. And there's nothing more to develop with the design.
Okay.
And the estimate is complete as well. Escalation is built into these numbers. The subcontractors, the bidders knew the scope, they know the duration, the schedule, all this work needs to be done by the start of school this fall. So that any escalation materials is built into their numbers already, so they
Okay.
can't come back to us and say,
Okay.
price went up for X, Y, Z.
okay,
That's in the number.
It-
So that's why we don't have anything there.
okay. Both those explanations make sense. I just had some questions at the
Yep.
beginning. In the
No, I
event
should
that
have addressed that.
there would
yeah.
be a challenge by anything, or a potential change order or such while work is going on, would it
Right.
would it have
Now-
come out of those funds?
Now, we did with the site work, we did collect some unit prices and have a couple of allowances built in case there are some unforeseens or unsuitable materials. We at least have a starting point with the bidders, the subcontractors, it was competitively bid, so we can apply the unit rate. We have it for unsuitable soils, for rocks or boulders that they might find. I feel like I'm missing a couple others. So we did try and plan ahead for what might happen out there and at least set ourselves up to not have to negotiate a price.
So on top of all that, and inclusive of all fencing for the project, we're still forecasting under.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I would like to say one thing, just so folks understand that when we submitted the project scope and budget agreement to the Mass School Building Authority at schematic design, we carried escalation on one line to the midpoint to construction. And then we also carried a design and pricing contingency. Those dollars, eventually, when the project is fully designed, that money rolls up into the trade costs and zeroes out
Okay.
below there. So what we have said, because you'll see this in other situations, that if you look at what percent that scope of work, that trade is of the overall trade cost, let's say it was 1%, then you could reasonably apply 1% of your escalation dollars and 1% of your design and pricing contingency to that. And each time we do another budget iteration, you're gonna see that number go down, and this next time around, our contingency's gonna go down again and roll up in there until we're at that 100% number. But that's essentially the way it's structured with the MSBA. You get to see it within their project funding agreement, how it just kicks right up into the trade cost.
I had a question about the fencing. You said you had carried a percentage for damaged fencing.
Yes.
Why is the city gonna be held accountable for that if a subcontractor damages a fence? Shouldn't they be held liable for that?
If we know who does it, absolutely. But we often find that sometimes it's plows, sometimes it's wind damage, sometimes could be a student that hits it. We don't, it's not always very easy to identify who did what.
Okay.
And how it got damaged.
Could you speak to the construction contingency for the 2.5% and talk about examples of how that would be utilized and what it's there for?
Sure. So the construction contingency piece is, which it's different from the design piece. This is for when we're actually out there building, and a lot of times it's twofold. It's either if there's a discrepancy on the drawings, say maybe something's shown on one set of drawings, but one place of the drawings, but not on the other. We would use this money if there was a need for a change order from a sub who it wasn't clear what they needed to carry. Or it's also for maybe certain unforeseens that happened as we're in construction. Or maybe there was something that was, maybe should have been included in the site work number, but was missed, quite honestly. It's a little bit of a buffer because, quite honestly, construction's not perfect, and nor are we.
So I think to answer, I asked to bring up that is because if you think about change orders and the concern about change orders is that's where that number would pay for those. So even change orders, to the best of our ability, we hope that all that money goes back into the project at the end, but that's money set aside in the budget for change orders.
And well-defined in the contract, the construction manager's contract.
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't have a question about that one. It was strictly the design contingency is kind of where
Why is
I
it
had the
zero
bigger
now all of a
question.
sudden?
And, you know, just to make sure that, yeah, we're in agreement that design is done.
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah, so as a general rule of thumb, we don't move that to zero until we talk to the design team and the OPN. We all kind of agree, yep, this design's in a good spot.
I do projects, but in financial services, and oftentimes we have said design is done, and then we start building, and all of a sudden, okay, we have to go back and reconsider design. whereas you have it more as a construction cost. I just wanted to have that clarification, that's all. Just in case all of a sudden it's like, oh, that turned out to be a design issue, and we may actually need to now account for it where we didn't have it in the pre-GMP amendment. But you answered my question, so thank you.
Any other discussion before we make a motion?
No, sir.
We have a motion to approve the 3 contractors recommended by Consigli.
So moved. Second.
Any objections?
None.
Very good. Thank you, Consigli. Thank you, Steve.
What were their names, brother?
Yeah, I kept them a secret, didn't I? So,
Find out on day one.
construction fencing is a company called Union Fence. The electrical is Systems Contracting Inc., which we have worked with in the past, and I think Skinsa has well. And then Walsh Contracting, right down the street, is the site contractor.
Never heard of them.
They're new.
Sorry, what was the electrical again?
Systems Contracting?
Contracting Inc.
So that's all we had on our agenda. Does anybody want to bring up any new business, any concerns? Eddie, yeah.
I don't know if it's for the entire group, but I had promised you at the last meeting that I would do order of magnitude cost look at lighting for the temporary parking lot
Yeah.
that we hope to be permanent at some point. So I have that. I'll just hand it to you tonight.
Thank you.
And you can just take a look at it. That's really kind of like our gig.
Yeah.
You know, so it's
Thank
just
you.
kind of an order of magnitude that I had promised based on what I would guess the permanent lighting solution would be for that parking lot.
Okay. Does this include prevailing wage?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good, thank you. So it was about $92,000 to.
About $90,000 to $100,000 to put lighting in that parking lot over there as a permanent.
Very good.
But if I remember right, we're only having temporary lighting as part of this project,
Yeah.
correct?
Correct.
That's
This
correct.
was just, this, again, this is kind of like a little
Get ahead of
conversation
ourselves.
we had and just have an understanding of if we wanted to, if the city independently wanted to look at putting permanent lighting there, because we intend to have that as a permanent lot after construction, understanding that Consigli is putting in just a binder coat and very temporary rudimentary parking lot. It's just something to look ahead and maybe plan for in the future for us, that's all.
That's good. The intent is to keep this as a permanent lot because at some point, we'd like to have some type of half shell or hat shell, some people call it, like a performing arts stage for the high school program for Attleboro Youth Theater, for Triborough Community Theater, if I said those right. You know, do Shakespeare in the Park type things and, you know, have our own little mini, I was gonna say Great Woods, but what's it called now? It's not Great.
Infinity Center.
Xfinity Center, yeah.
At Great
So-
Woods, though.
At Great Woods,
At
okay,
Great
yeah.
Woods, so it's still there.
Yeah, it would be nice to have something small like that. We used to have one at the Capron Park in the main field, but that got taken down many, many years ago. But it'd be nice to have one again, you know, just to enhance the community and our arts programs in the community. So, any other business anybody would like to chat about tonight? No? Marion?
Yes, there was a question that came from Christie, and we just wanted to ask that if the formal vote could be made to approve the pre-GMP Amendment 1 for the value.
4,141,486.
Very good. Let's have a motion to approve.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
Any just, before we jump that far, any discussion about that, though? Sorry, I should have asked that first.
I can explain a little bit further if
Yeah,
if
let's
you'd
go do
like.
that before we do the formal.
The OALs that you approved authorize us to issue subcontracts to the 3 subcontractors we just talked about. The value that we're looking for, the full value, the 4.1 million, essentially allows us to sign our GMP Amendment number 1, which will allow us to not only issue those subcontracts, but also get funding for all of the indirect costs that Steve talks about. All of our management time, setting up of the trailers, and that's essentially the first of 4 pre-GMP amendments that we will request by the committee. And they're amendments to our pre-con agreement, and they help start with all of these early release enabling packages.
Any questions, anyone? No questions? Okay, let's do that motion over again. Should have done that first. Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any objections? Oh, very good. Measure is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next meeting, I believe, is the March 20th, next week.
And
Yeah.
the major event is to approve the 60% submission to the MSBA. So,
Correct.
we'll be getting number presentations, based on what you were talking about earlier?
Yes, we're having our reconciliation meeting on Friday. We hope to come back and report to this group that we're within budget and ask for your approval to submit to the Mass School Building Authority.
Very good. I'll see you Friday morning.
Okay, great, thank you.
Motion to adjourn. Time is 6:36. Very good.
And then if I can have you sign and date the invoices, please.
Vocational
Oh, okay.
stuff.